So, selective solidarity or a natural reaction? Joining me now to discuss why the world prayed for Paris, but not necessarily for Beirut, is Halim Shebaya, a researcher and analyst on Middle East politics. Thanks for joining us, Halim. Halim, you wrote a very powerful op-ed. People shared it widely. The title was "From Beirut to Paris, We Are All Hypocrites and Selective Grievers." That's a harsh title. Why?
Hi, thanks for having me. Well, the title is mainly to draw attention to the fact that while there is a legitimate concern being voiced about the disparity in the media reaction between the attacks that took place in Europe and the attacks that take place on a regular basis in other parts of the world, and especially the Arab world for that matter, but also when we do point out the selective grief, the selective hypocrisy, our own selective hypocrisy and our own selective justice and our selective sympathy is actually highlighted, because in different ways we are all selectively, we all selectively choose what to grieve on and what to draw attention on. That was the main idea, but I can go in detail if you'd like.
Well, let's flesh this out. There are people who talk of this term, I don't know who coined it, whataboutery. Every time something blows up somewhere, people are killed. There are those who are quick to jump on a whataboutery bandwagon, as it's been called, to say, but what about the people who died here? What about the people who died there? Is this at the heart of your thesis?
I think it's not just about what about other people, because it's good to definitely have solidarity with the victims of France and for the victims of any city wherever human suffering happens. But this is the main issue here, is the fact that we're dealing with human suffering. And we're dealing with human suffering when it comes to terrorist attacks that indiscriminately target civilians. This is why we have a lot of solidarity. But also when we talk about human suffering, we're not living in an island. So what about the human suffering taking place in Iraq, in Syria, in Palestine, in Yemen, in other places in the world, wherever there is any violence? So in this sense, the what about, what you call the whatabouter, perhaps is actually relevant, because it's not like it's these human sufferings that took place years ago. On a daily basis, you have bombs in Iraq, in Beirut. At this moment, the frequency is a bit less, fortunately. But in Syria, you have killings on a daily basis. So yes, of course, we say, what about this human solidarity? President Barack Obama rightly said that the Paris attacks were an attack on all humanity. Well, obviously, the question that's asked, isn't it an attack on all humanity if there are human sufferings in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, and wherever, and not just in Europe, obviously? So maybe that was the heart of the concern of the whatabouter mentality.
Is our empathy decided by the nationality of the victim, or at the very least, the location of the attack?
I think in large part it is, and it's on the one hand, it is a normal reaction. So I'm a Beirut-based commentator, but I'm now in London, and I'm walking on the streets of London. I can understand why a person in Europe, a person in London will have more sympathy with the victims in France, because obviously, as you mentioned, the proximity factor is undeniably an important factor. But you also have the similarities in terms of the cultures and the cities. We don't expect a bomb to occur in London or in Paris. So on the one hand, you have this justifiable selective empathy. On the other hand, you are correct, I think, that yes, we do sometimes, as one commentator noted, we categorize victims. We sort of, as you said, perhaps not just on nationality, perhaps related to political opinion, perhaps related to where one stands on the political spectrum. So for example, in the Lebanon bombings, the headlines read at the start, mostly in most international media, that the bomb hit a Hezbollah stronghold in reference to the fact that Hezbollah is involved in the Syria war. And regardless of that issue and the political debate about whether they should be there or they shouldn't be, the fact that the victims actually were targeted indiscriminately, and also it was an area with a lot of a mixture of, they weren't all part of that political party. So in effect, yes, we do dehumanize sometimes certain victims. We do try to dilute the tragedy in some areas, and we do magnify the tragedy in other areas. But I will note at the end of just this short note I'm making that there is an element to do with who the international leaders decide to have solidarity with. So when you have the top international leaders displaying strong statements of solidarity, the international media naturally will follow, will cover these facts. So it's also not just the media that's selective. It's also the international leaders, world leaders, who should actually decry and denounce violence and terrorism wherever it occurs.
Good point, Halim. Halim, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Halim Shebaya joining us there from London.